The smoke of Satan.
Hello and welcome again to The Smoke of Satan. My name is Joseph Cillo Jr. I'm the writer of edgy Catholic fiction. I've written a thriller, When the Wood is Dry, an edgy Catholic thriller, my comic book and graphic novel, Blind Prophet, and my Christmas novel, Merry Friggin' Christmas, an edgy Christmas comedy, a Christmas gift for atheists. Yes. Yeah, so you know an atheist, give them one. It'll be good. It'll be good. Most of these books you can get for free on the ebooks, like When the Wood is Dry, and which also comes in a Catholic edition. Has a little extra content for Catholics. And Merry Friggin' Christmas, the standard edition, is available for free as an ebook, but you will have to pay a couple bucks for the naughty edition. So the standard edition is kind of a clever way to cover up some of the bad language. Well, welcome back to The Smoke of Satan. We are on episode 9, The Modernist as Historian and Critic. Okay? And remember that the Smoke of Satan comes from something that St. John Paul VI said. He said, we would say that through some mysterious crack. No, it is not mysterious. Through some crack, the smoke of Satan has entered the Church of God. There is doubt, uncertainty, problems, unrest, dissatisfaction, confrontation. He said that back in 1971, so this is after the Vatican Council in the 60s, and then the promulgation of the new Mass, it was in like 69 or something. And then all of a sudden, we had a lot of trouble in the church. And the Pope at the time, Pope Paul VI, said he felt like the smoke of Satan had entered the church. Well, we think that that has something to do with the Vatican II Council, and that's becoming a popular thing now. I mean, Archbishop Vigano is out there saying things like, we got to just scrap that whole thing. I agree with him. Scrap the Second Vatican Council. Even Pope Paul VI, when they after the council was over, said there's nothing dogmatic addressed in this. So basically, you don't have to believe anything that's in it. So why is it changing everything in the church? So his idea is, let's just stop trying to fix this thing. They're using it to corrupt the true faith, especially with our current pope, who is, brought idols into the church right there at St. Peter's tomb. It's outrageous what he's done in the name of ecumenism, which kind of came into being in the Vatican II era. So let's talk about what Pope Pius the Tenth was doing in 1907 when he wrote this encyclical, Pascendi Dominici Gregis, because he was having a battle against what he called the Modernist Heresy, and nobody seems to be fighting the Modernist Heresy anymore. At least the popes don't. This pope isn't. So maybe Archbishop Vigano, he might have something to say about the Modernist Heresy. But the hierarchy of the church currently, the magisterium, is not really talking about it. And yet, Pope Pius X was really spooked about it and put in a lot of measures to try to limit their influence. So let's talk about what the modernist as historian and critic, okay? See how it influenced those things. But first, let's always remember, I want to remind you the difference between traditional theology as developed by St. Thomas Aquinas and what the modernists think, so that you understand the very basis of this problem. It is not a surface level thing. This is right down at the roots of what Catholics believe and what people believe is true, and how to actually construct your theology is where we run into the problem. So St. Thomas Aquinas said that we have senses and we have reason, and this produces knowledge and leads us to a natural end. He took this from Aristotle, ancient Greece, before there was, before Jesus was born, okay? They developed that idea. And through their reasoning, the Greeks reasoned that there should be one God, and that God should reveal himself. But he didn't really reveal himself to the Greeks until Jesus came, okay? So now, St. Thomas Aquinas took this idea, and then he added to it this order of grace, which is based on faith. And he said that there's a revelation directly from God, and that's another source of knowledge. And that will complete the sources of knowledge. You will have all the knowledge can be explained either through our senses and our reason, or as a direct revelation from God. And we also have a supernatural end in which we will be judged. Okay? Now, the theologians in France, the more modern theologians, came up with this idea of nouvelle théologie, which means the new theology. And their idea was that they could resource these documents, so they want to go back. They call it ressourcement. It's a French thing, Go back and reread the Fathers of the Church, but reread them through this kind of modernist lens where we don't have direct revelation from God. So God is only working through our senses. We only know God through our senses. We only know anything through our senses. If we know God at all, we know him through our senses. Senses leading to reason, and grace is, they said that grace is the perfection of reason, and that faith is the grace is the perfection of nature, and faith is the perfection of reason. So because grace is kind of the perfection of nature, it's part of this natural way that we learn things. You don't need to have a separate revelation directly from God. Okay? And this change in the underpinning of the philosophical and theological thought has led to what we call the Modernist Heresy. Because when you reread those documents through this lens, you don't get the same answers that St. Thomas Aquinas had. If you want to check out St. Thomas Aquinas, he wrote the Summa Theologica, which is a whole big series of volumes addressing all of theology. So it's not like he wasn't thinking a lot about it. But anyway, this is contrary to what the traditional faith of the Catholic Church was for, I guess, 1800 years or so before these new theologians started messing around with this stuff. And the early popes, when this first started, Pope Leo the 13th and Pope Pius the Tenth and some others, they all were like, this is a problem, we can't believe this. But there's nobody saying that anymore, right? This was the ideas and philosophy and theology that took over in Vatican II. So they kind of surrendered to it. Nobody's fighting it anymore. My thesis is that we need to fight it. We need to go back, we need to learn what Pius X said about this, and say, we need to pick up the banner and take up the battle again to fight against this and reclaim our Catholic faith that's been distorted. Okay. Now, let's move on. So let's get on to the modernist as historian and critic. So first we're going to take a little look at history. So history, here's just a general statement. History and their criticism are saturated with their philosophy, and their historical critical conclusions are the natural fruit of their philosophical principles. And those principles are Agnosticism, Transfiguration of things by faith, and Disfiguration. Okay? So, this is this modernist lens that gets thrown onto history. So, let's see how this works. We're going to go in detail through these. Okay? So first, Agnosticism. In things where a double element, the divine and the human, mingles, in Christ, for example, or the church, or the sacraments, or the many other objects of the same kind, a division must be made and the human element assigned to history, while the divine will go to faith. Okay, so this is what they because they don't have these two sources where you have kind of what you know by your senses and what's the direct revelation of God. They're always in there trying to separate it out, and tease out what came from God and what came from faith, rather than just saying it's all sources of knowledge. So here they are again doing that, and they're putting this philosophical lens over how they interpret history. Okay, so here's an example. So the Christ of history and the Christ of faith, the sacraments of history and the sacraments of faith. So we have the real Jesus who lived among us and was crucified. If he was crucified, I don't know. They even believe that. So, but then we have the one of faith who is the miracle worker, who was the Son of God. It was all these other things that they think we have transfigured the historical reality and disfigured the historical reality with our faith and created this non-historical Jesus who was a miracle worker, when really Jesus was just a man. This is heretical. You can't believe this. You can't believe it and be a Catholic. Okay? So what else? But this is how they want to read history. They want to find the real historical Jesus as opposed to the one who's in the Bible. That's heresy. Can't think that. Okay? So, next, the transfiguration of things by faith. Okay. The human element itself, which the historian has to work on, as it appears in the documents, has been by faith transfigured. That is to say, raised above its historical conditions. So the historian must eliminate also the accretions with which faith has added, assign them to faith itself, and to the history of faith. Okay? So what we're going to do here is we're going to go back, and we analyze everything, and we say, well, look at this. This was transfigured. This was raised above its original station. We made it bigger and better. It's kind of like a fish story, It was this big. No, it was this big. No, it was this big, right? So, what's in the Bible is the story about the fish being this big. But really, the fish was only this big. It wasn't really that big a fish. There's even fish stories in the Bible. When Jesus, causes them to catch all these fish, he says, throw the net over on that side of the boat now. And they do, and they get this big haul of fish that practically sinks the boat. Well, maybe it didn't actually almost sink the boat. I don't know. They're going to make up some, interpreting the Bible as if it's a fish story. That's not how we can have faith, But that's how this is what they believe they need to do in order to interpret what was the real event that happened that actually caused people to believe that they caught so many fish that almost sunk the boat, right? It's wrong. That's not what we should be doing in our faith, okay? So the example here is when treating of Christ, the historian must set aside all that surpasses man in his natural condition, okay? So again, we got to get down to a Jesus who was just a man, who was a real man, and I don't want to even think about what that suggests about his mother, who we believe was a virgin, right? So we run into a lot of trouble with this if we're not believing this, and we're trying to tease out and say, oh, it's okay to think of the Virgin Mary as a virgin as a part of faith, but really we know she wasn't, because the historical Mary wasn't. Really? Really? You can't do that and be a Catholic. This is not consistent with the Catholic faith. Okay? Next, the Disfiguration. Okay? Excluding from history and relegating to faith everything which, in their judgment, is not in harmony with what they call the logic of the facts, and in character with the persons of whom they are predicated. Thus they will not allow that Christ ever uttered those things which do not seem to be within the capacity of the multitudes that listened to him. Hence, they delete from his real history and transfer to faith all the allegories found in his discourses. Oh, so the people really wouldn't have understood this, so he couldn't have said it. You know, you see how this is all based on a lack of faith. So now they're saying that, you know, when they wrote it down, they transfigured the story because he couldn't really have said this. And so we got to get down to what he really said. You'll even find these knuckleheads writing up Bibles where they have what Jesus said will be in a different color, what they really think he said, and what all the other stuff is just what was added later. See, this fits their schema for how they think about how religions develop. But it isn't what we believe as Catholics. We can't believe this, right? We have to believe it's the truth. These are sacred documents that capture who Jesus was. He was God and man. Fully God, fully man. And that's a mystery. It's a mystery that's hard to understand. And if you want to see somebody struggling with the concept of fully God and fully man, you can read my book, Merry Friggin' Christmas. Because that's exactly what my atheist character in here is making fun of in his comedy routine. Okay? So he confronts that one. Okay? But you can't do this. Right? You can't go in and separate, well, this part of Jesus was God, so that goes in our faith bucket. And this part of Jesus was the historical Jesus, so that goes on our history bucket. There was only one Jesus. There wasn't two. Okay? Alright, so this kind of sums it up here. Their method is to put themselves into the position and person of Christ, and then to attribute to him what they would have done under like circumstances. Okay? In this way, absolutely a priori, and acting on philosophical principles which they admit they hold, but which they affect to ignore, they proclaim that Christ, according to what they call his real history, was not God, and never did anything divine, and that as man he did and said only what they, judging from the time in which he lived, can admit to have said or done. So this is a problem. You know, if you put yourself in the position of, you can't put yourself in the position of Jesus, who is both God and man, and then say, well, if I were him, this is what I would have done, or what I would have said. No. You see how bad this is? And this will fundamentally alter how you perceive the entire religion. You won't be serious about your religion if you do this. You might be serious about destroying your religion, right? Transforming it, changing it, using it as a tool to control people. That kind of thing you might do, right? So, you know, but you don't have the faith. You can't be a theologian of the Catholic Church and not have the faith. And you can't be a historian of the Catholic, a Catholic historian and believe this. See, his comment here about them not admitting to being philosophers, they make a big deal about saying, oh, well, I don't know anything about philosophy, I'm just reading history. But their history, the way they read history, is forced to fit into this theological scheme, this philosophical scheme, which is based on agnosticism. It's based on there isn't a God. It's based on, oh, what is the real thing that happened, and then how was it transfigured to make it into something that was more divine. That is not what we believe. That's not how this works, okay? Now, let's talk a little bit about criticism and its principles. This gets a little tricky. So my diagram is a little cluttered here, but I hope you can kind of follow it. So, the dominion of philosophy over history. Okay, the critic on the data furnished him by the historian makes two parts of all his documents. Real history, which has a triple elimination test. Okay? So we eliminate anything supernatural, that belongs to faith. And then we eliminate historical elements that were transfigured by faith. That goes in our faith bucket as well. And then we eliminate historical elements disfigured by faith. That goes over there in the faith bucket. We call that faith bucket, we call it the internal history. Okay? So this is this. All right, I'm just telling you what they believe. This is what they do. You may have heard people doing this kind of thing. Like when they say, how did Jesus feed the thousands of people? Well, really, he just, kind of broke bread, and then everybody saw him doing that, and they all started to share what food they had. And it really wasn't, that was what they thought. They all declared it a miracle because everybody ate it. Everybody was able to eat. But it was really all food that they brought. There wasn't anything miraculous going on. No. No. It says very specifically in the Bible that there was a multiplication of the food. They were worried about the people passing out if they went home. So that's contrary to what we believe. So let's talk about this internal history now. Internal history. The rest is attributed to the history of faith, or as it is styled, to internal history. It's generated by need. This is, again, this vital eminence kind of thing, where they think that there's a need, so we have this need to fill in the blanks, to understand, for faith to fill in what we can't understand in a rational way. So then this need will, then be supplied by, faith. We'll be filling it in, and then that will be subject to evolution. So over time, that will change even more. Okay? Now, they oppose the history of the faith to real history precisely as real. Okay? So they oppose the history of the faith because they say there's this real history out there, and that really isn't it. Right? Okay? That's kind of an awkward sentence from my friend Pope Pius the Tenth, but that's where it came from. So, thus, we have a double Christ. We have a real Christ, a Christ who has lived at a given moment and in a given place, and a Christ, the one of faith, who never really existed, a Christ who has never lived outside the pious meditations of the believer. The Christ, for instance, whom we find in the Gospel of St. John, which is pure contemplation from beginning to end. No, right? We believe the events in the Gospel of John actually happened, right? Oh, my goodness. So they go through this routine here where they look at the documents and they say, how old is the document, right? So we can't have the age of the document needs to be less than the need. So if you didn't have a need, you couldn't have a document. So then they make that fit. And then they eliminate anything supernatural, anything that's transfigured, or anything that's disfigured. And then they come up with this real history, and they come up with this real Christ, who is nothing like the Christ we believe in. Then they have this other side where it's faith. But it's all imaginary on the faith side. It never really happened, right? So Christ of faith never existed. He's generated by a need and subject to evolution. Okay? So, everything in the history of the church is to be explained by vital emanation. See, that's what I'm saying. We get the need, we get facts, we get narration. And then the age of any document must be less than the age of the need in the church. So, see how they're fitting it in? They're fitting it into their philosophical way of thinking. They think, this is the way things happen, so this is the way our faith must have happened. But there was something extraordinary that happened in our faith. We had Jesus, the Son of God, born of a virgin, that, it doesn't happen every day. It doesn't happen like anything else ever happened. This is extraordinary, right? If we don't believe it's extraordinary, we have no business being Catholics, right? If you don't believe, there's a problem. Okay. So, we have this distinction between. Oh, okay. There's also a distinction between the beginning of a fact and its development. All right. So you have this fact, this thing that happened, and then over time, this thing develops because people read it in a different way. It's kind of like, you're playing telephone and the message gets scrambled and mixed up by the end of the day. Okay? All right. So this is what they do. They separate the documents from the first stage of the fact and its development. And then they force it into this thinking about this law of evolution, which involves, and we spoke about this in the last episode, the conserving force and a progressive force that come together, and then there's some kind of a compromise, and we overcome these obstacles or whatever, and we end up with a compromise which we declare as true. It becomes the dogma. It's crazy. That's not what happens. No. Okay. Let's listen to a couple of quotes from what St. Pius X thinks about this, okay? Who is the author of this history? The historian? The critic? Assuredly neither of these, but the philosopher. From beginning to end, everything in it is a priori, and a priori in a way that reeks of heresy. So all of it is a priori, meaning it's all based on philosophical thought, kind of, right? So these men are certainly to be pitied, and of them the apostle might well say, they became vain in their thoughts, professing themselves as to be wise, they became fools. That's from Romans 21:22. I guess it's 1. First Romans chapter 1, 21-22. But at the same time, they excite just indignation when they but at the same time, they excite just indignation when they accuse the church of torturing the texts, arranging and confusing them after its own fashion, and for the needs of its cause. In this, they are accusing the church of something for which their own conscience plainly reproaches them. Okay, so if you're doing this kind of stuff, right, in history, and you're doing it to the religious text, and you're going in there mangling it up and saying, oh, I think this was the real thing, and then this was transfigured, and this, you're the one who's torturing it. Their claim that the church is skewing and torturing the text to fit what the church wants, when you got this whole philosophy underlying you and giving you a reason to torture the text, that's a rank hypocrisy, and that's what he's saying. So they're saying that their own conscience is reproaching them. Okay, so that is what we have on the history and criticism from St. Pius X in Pascendi Dominici Gregis. In our next video, we are going to address the modernist on the Bible. So we're going to get down to brass tacks. What are they doing to screw up the Bible? Again, my name is Joseph Cillo Jr. I'm a writer of edgy Catholic fiction. When Wood is Dry is my novel, edgy Catholic thriller. It's kind of a tough novel, and it's great, but it's got some really difficult material in it. And Blind Prophet, my comic book and graphic novel, and Merry Friggin' Christmas, an edgy Christmas comedy, which is a great Christmas gift for atheists. Okay, we will see you next time on The Smoke of Satan.